Okay, well, welcome once again to our formation series for novices in the North American Preceptory. Today we're going to be going over the governance of the Poor Knights of Christ. The presentation you're going to see has been a slightly modified version of the presentation that was actually sent to me by the Chancellor of the entire order. The Chancellor in our order is like the Prime Minister. So if you're familiar with different forms of government, most governments have a president and a prime minister. And Dom Lorenzo Scopoli is our chancellor. As a rule of thumb, when it's a matter of governance, we go through Dom Lorenzo. When it's a matter of personal things, you directly go to the Grand Master. And Dom Lorenzo and the Grand Master are like this. So you can go to Dom Lorenzo and he'll pass it on to the Grand Master. But before we get into the nitty gritty, before we look at how the order is governed, I want to step back for a moment and talk about what makes this brotherhood so unique versus a third order, versus a confraternity, versus other lay groups in the church. Other lay groups in the church, if they're a third order, they're attached to a principal institute, like the Dominicans, the Norbertines, or even the canons regular here. And the priests and voting members of that order determine the destiny of the third order membership. That obviously has a lot of advantages to it. The biggest advantage being is not my problem. Laymen get to look at tons of things and say, not my problem. They don't have to worry about where the money's coming from. They don't have to worry about canonical obligations. They don't have to worry. It's just not my problem. I just show up and I do the devotional thing. But at the same time, third order members then have no freedom. They can't go out and start an initiative without explicit permission from the priest, and they would have to put that to a vote. So they're never allowed to represent the body that they belong to. Then there are confraternities, and of course, many of you are enrolled in the confraternity of the Brown Scapular, maybe the confraternity of the Rosary, maybe belong to the confraternity of the Fraternal Society of St. Peter. And these loose fellowships, based oftentimes on prayer or good works or mutual devotion, have no common life. You share in a spiritual basket, a banquet, in that you pray as a member of this confraternity, and thus you enjoy the benefits spiritual of membership. But as a rule of thumb, I've never met somebody who was thrilled I was a member of the Rosary confraternity or the Brown Scapular. I mean, there was a time where that was a bigger thing. But once again, confraternities are governed. 1,000 members could be added to a confraternity. It doesn't mean very much. It may mean a great deal spiritually, but I'm talking about in a practical change of your life. Our order is not a third order. When people say, well, like a third order, they couldn't be more wrong. Our order is like an order. You have to take responsibility as a full knight for this brotherhood. How do we do that? Okay? We all possess a moral certainty when we join this brotherhood. Certain aspects of that moral certainty are obvious, like we're all Catholics. Then there are other things that are not so obvious. We're going to live by the rule of the Poor Knights of Christ and the spirituality of St. Bernard, and we have specific ends, and you have to do it this way. We're erected under certain constitutional ends. For example, women have zero authority in this order. Zero. None. It was designed that way on purpose. The ancient Templars, briefly, had a women's branch. They didn't fight, they were like cloistered religious. Imagine just religious people basically fell under the protection and financial burden on things of the Templar and prayed for them. So it existed, so we have it. They're important. There are several Danes in Italy who play very important roles in the administerial organization of our order. With that being said, they're never allowed to vote. Only one of them is allowed to speak ever at any order of knights, and they only get to speak briefly. That doesn't mean they're dirt. They're still a very prized member, but this is a male governed order. They have no votes, and consequently, they have fewer obligations. Okay, so we all possess a certain moral certainty in this order, and that should lead to harmonious government. Okay, and that moral certainty informs an internal morality. I should not ever be distressed. Remember the gospel. The centurion with the greatest faith that Christ had met said, I am a man of authority, right? If I tell somebody under me to go do this thing, I know he will do it. That is how this order works, is by internal morality. When you join the order and you say, I will live this rule, I may need to test you to make sure that you're prepared to take vows to do that, but I should have full confidence that even when I'm not around, you're living it. You're living it. If we all share the same moral frame and we all agree to certain rules, then even when we're absent from one another's lives, we're truly one. Now, if you don't do this, the order falls apart. When obedience is broken, this doesn't work. America, or any nation, only works when the majority of people obey the law because it's the law, not because they're afraid of criminal prosecution. It's the same thing in us, right? We're only going to work if the majority of us keep the rule, even when we're not around each other. The reason why I'm impressing this upon you is that there is no avenue to the solemn profession as a knight that does not involve governance in this brotherhood. If you want to avoid the governance aspects, voting, money, obedience, letters, meetings, be a knight of devotion, be an oblate. Consequently, when you are a voting member, you have real authority in this order. You have real authority. If you don't vouch for a candidate like you, Peter, if somebody wanted to join in Washington State and you met him and you said, I don't think this is a good idea, I would trust you as preceptor. I'd block him. Okay? And if it went to a vote, your interview of him would be strongly considered by the council. Here locally, you will, Chris, when you take your voting rights, and even now, if somebody wanted to join and both of you looked at me and said, I don't think this is a good idea, right? I'd consider that. When you're voting members, you could effectively block them. You could vote against them. And they wouldn't be admitted. That'd be the end of it. Okay? All right. So let's get started on the nitty-gritty. So the militia as a whole, and by the way, I am assuming here that you've read the constitutions, that chapter on governance. I will briefly mention some things as we go through this from the constitutions, but I am assuming that you've already read it. By the way, if you do want to follow along, I'm looking at section 3, or heading 3, article 13, called the Central Bodies, the Local Bodies, on the militiatempli.net website. So the authority of the order goes like this. There's the magistral see, which is made up of the Grand Master, the spiritual director general, okay, the magistral tribunal, the magistral council, the grand magistracy, okay? All those groups are at the magistral see, okay? The only thing you need to know pretty much is that the Grand Master runs things. He has supreme executive power in the day-to-day. So he executes the will of the general chapter. The general chapter is made up of the preceptors. There is an Italian preceptory, a Hungarian preceptory, us, the North American preceptory. There is a German preceptory and a Spanish preceptory. Okay, you'll notice here that there is a UK delegation. When there's only one knight in an area, a delegation is formed. They have a right to sit on the General Council, which is convoked every year, which the preceptors all have to travel to Italy to be at. And the rules we come up with are binding. But they don't have the right to vote until they're elevated to be a preceptory. And they need at least 2 knights to be a preceptory. Now, by the way, might I add, the magistral see can split preceptories too. If the North American preceptor, if we ever had a situation where there was 3 Mexican knights, for example, it wouldn't make sense for me to be their preceptor. It makes sense to have a Mexican preceptory. But that's not my decision. That is the decision of the Grand Master. Okay, so okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Grand Master's authority. Okay, whenever we have a problem in the church, in canon law or anything, the Grand Master is always the one that deals with that, unless he delegates somebody. He always chairs every major board group in the order, but funnily enough, he does not vote. He does not vote. He listens and he executes. Now, when he speaks, he has tremendous obvious influence, but he does not vote. He can take immediate executive action in the course of an emergency, even if it would be something like the council would normally have to vote on. He has to be celibate. He lives in Italy at the magistral see, which is the head of the order, which is a little Templar castle and church. He lives there. And he has remained in office for 5 years, with the exception of our current Grand Master, who is appointed for life. And you will notice that at the very end of our constitutions, it says that he can step down, or if he becomes sick and infirm, he can be replaced. But he is it for life, the first Grand Master. Okay. Now, there's also a spiritual director general. I'm not sure, believe it or not, if we actually have at the moment a spiritual director general, but normally that's a priest who actually lives at the magistral see and he directs the general spiritual direction of the order. Okay, and he sits on everything again, but he does not vote again, even though he has tremendous influence. Okay. Let's see. Let's keep going here. Okay, so in the North American Preceptory, you'll notice that there's knights without a commandery, and then there's the Mid-Atlantic Commandery. We are in the Mid-Atlantic Commandery, even though I'm preceptor. If I was to make a local decision, I would talk to Dom Chris and ask his permission, because he's the appointed local superior. So for example, Will, before I gave you your initial reading assignments, I cleared it with him. He has to officially call our commandery chapters, not me. He does. When we're in common, I still sit in the first place, but if it was commandery business, he would conduct the meeting and I would vote like a normal member. Okay? That's his office is the local body. My office is the general body. Knights without a commandery all fall under the authority of the preceptor. Okay? And this gets real practical as, we move forward here, move on. So the North American preceptory is divided up like this. And you'll notice, now once again, remember, this is not my PowerPoint presentation. This is from the Chancellor. You'll notice that the Grand Master and the preceptor are actually rated right next to one another. Okay? I do not stand in the place of the Grand Master, but I operate like the Grand Master. No one has the right at any level to ever refuse the preceptor at a commandery level or anything else for him to sit on a chair, to involve him in decisions, or let him speak his piece. Even when a commandery wants to accept a candidate or so forth, they still need to let the preceptor voice his opinion. You may not get to vote on it, but he still gets to voice his opinion. Okay? I would represent, if we were sued, I would represent us in court here on our nonprofit. Consequently, the nonprofit is set up here where I live. Okay? Normally, you go through the magistral legate. You'll notice here, when there's the council, the preceptory, and the magistral legate is the Grand Master's chosen knight to represent him in his absence here. He conducts, his biggest office is to conduct the general chapter. Secondarily, there was a time too where the legate also is the one who arranged for any direct visit of a knight or associate or friend from this country to the magistral see. So if you ever wanted to visit while you were a novice, you would normally arrange that through the legate. Although communication is so good nowadays, you could probably just do it yourself. The magistral legate sits on the preceptory tribunal. The preceptory tribunal is made up of 2 knights that are voted on every general chapter, or general election. These knights and the legate can override a preceptor's decision. Okay, so let's say that I disciplined somebody formally, and they didn't like the decision. They can appeal the decision to the tribunal headed up by the magistral legate. The tribunal's job is not to override my decision if it's a matter of practicality. The tribunal's job is to ensure that I have made the decision in accordance with our law. So it's like an appeals court. They're not interested in whether or not, they're only interested if the case was heard according to the law. You have to have a basis in law to file an appeal, or an evidence problem, or something. And if that tribunal, if the tribunal sided with the preceptor, the member still has the right to appeal it to all the bodies that exist, the magistral tribunal, and then the Grand Master himself. And if you don't like that answer, you can appeal it to the bishop. You don't like his answer, you can appeal it to Rome. There has been a knight who went all the way to Rome. He was being kicked out. He went all the way to Rome. Rome sided with us. So there you go. Okay. Next, underneath the preceptor is the council of the preceptory, which we will talk about in the next slide. The council of preceptory is convoked before any major decision is made. For example, it's not a major decision. It's not a major decision for me to spend $100 on offering mass stipends for knights to have said on their saint's name. I can do that of my own discretion. I don't need permission. However, when we adopted our, when we bring in a new candidate for the preceptory, not the commandery, it has to be voted on by the council of the preceptory. Okay. You'll see here there's an almoner and census taker. That's not really a thing we have right now. They're allowed to sit on a number of boards, but we don't, that's not a thing. We're not big enough. And the almoner is really the chamberlain. He sees the day-to-day money stuff. Then there's the chapter, the preceptory. The chapter is composed of all the voting members of the preceptory. That is knights in both simple and solemn profession. And remember, solemn profession means it's final profession, not that you're in solemn vows. And then under that, you have the Mid-Atlantic Commandery. You have the dames. We'll go over. They're allowed to have their own thing if there's enough of them right now. There's only one. Novices, and then oblates - friends. Oblates are understood as knights of devotion, like our beloved oblate Jason here. And then friends are any member that wishes to freely and publicly associate themselves. So Adam, for example, wishes to be considered a friend and willing to always help us out if we need it here in town. So preceptories are erected by the Grand Master. It's a Templar province. We have functional and administrative autonomy. In other words, we do not need to go to the Grand Master and ask permission to operate on like admitting a candidate. I can admit a candidate and I send them the paperwork after the fact. So what authority does the preceptor have? I always joke that the preceptor is more like being in middle management in a sense. Because the Grand Master, obviously everything I do can be appealed above me, right? Although that actually has never happened yet. But the preceptor gets to choose the priors, the commanders, and the chamberlain. Consequently, it doesn't say here, I also get to choose which priest I want to be my spiritual advisor on the preceptory council. Mine is Monsignor Fritz, FSSP. I can assign the tasks of the council, so I get to set the agenda. Although if you've ever noticed, I always let every knight submit items to it. And I get to express my opinion on pretty much everything. Anything you want in a commandery, anything that anybody does in my jurisdiction, I can express an opinion on it. I have authority on it. It means I get to speak my piece. People don't get to do stuff without me getting to have a say in it. Consequently, I can also block a lot of things under obedience. I can tell somebody to do something, for example. I can tell somebody not to do something. Once again, they can appeal the decision, but if I say they have to do it, they have to do it. Only now, this isn't silly. This isn't like, if I tell you, like, I don't have the right to tell a husband not to take his wife to dinner. I have the right to tell a husband to not take his wife to dinner at a strip club. Okay, but unless it somehow deals in like that domain, I don't have rights over the personal certain private autonomous aspects of the knight's life. It only deals with matters of the order. Okay. In the case of the resignation, I have the right to resign under canon law, period. So I can quit if I want to. Or the removal, I can of course be removed by a vote, or the Grand Master could jump in if there was some serious moral dereliction on my part. The Grand Master can also, if a preceptor has just been established, can make a pro-preceptor. Right now, I am pro-preceptor because we're only elected for 3-year terms. You could only serve 2 consecutive 3-year terms. I've served 1. And then a new knight has to take it over at least for a period of 3 years. So right now I'm pro-preceptor until our general election, and then somebody new, or I may be reelected to another term, somebody new, one or the other will happen. Right now I'm pro-preceptor. I have still full authority. It's just my title is slightly different. Okay. So the chapter of the preceptory is convened by the Grand Master and presided over every 3 years by a legate. Now, under our current constitutions, might I add, this has now been changed to every year. This is from 2002, but now I'm supposed to call a chapter every year. It's not an election, though. It's just a chapter, okay? Here we go, every 3 years, they elect the preceptor, the capitular knights, the members of the tribunal, the preceptory, from among the knights of the preceptory itself. Okay? Now, chapter, if I can call a chapter at any time, I can literally write to everybody and say it's going to happen, be here at this time. I've never done that, but I could. You can also force a chapter meeting. All voting members can write a letter, and if over 50% demand a chapter has to happen, period. Okay? So you can write a formal letter, and once copies of those letters have been submitted, this is to prevent some situation where obviously a preceptor is being derelict in his duty, or is sick or ill or lost, because it could happen where somebody could like die if they were preceptor and they were cut off from all of us and we were wondering what was happening, that we could call a chapter to deal with it. I get to appoint the members of the preceptory council except the representative of the dames. That includes the spiritual advisor, the vicar. The vicar is the disciplinarian. He is the administrative go-to guy. Dom Jason Wood is the vicar. Okay. Generally, the vicar deals with you before I directly do, if it's an administrative thing. The priors, the commanders, and the representatives of the dames. Okay? So if I appoint the commander, he serves on the council as well. And he gets a say in the general day-to-day governance issues. The preceptory council establishes the priors, commanders, and the delegation of the dames. So we draw up the boundaries, we discuss it, and we vote on it. We promote the development of general activities of the preceptory and coordinates that of the commanderies. So obviously it doesn't make sense. I mean, like, the reason why the commanders are on there is so that they work together, so that, I mean, ideally, if we're all going to be traveling for a retreat, we should do it together. If we're all going to be working on projects, we should help one another out. Okay? And then we approve or reject the budgets of the commanderies. Right now, the principle is 50% of the total tithe money submitted by members of the commandery remain in that commandery for those knights to do with, to budget. And they submit that to the preceptory council for them to approve. So when you submit your 3% tithes here in this Mid-Atlantic commandery and so forth, we'll have a certain pot of money. That pot of money is what we are going to use for retreats, flying in retreat masters, buying books, habits, breviaries, all those types of things. We will spend money based on that. Okay, the more money we have, the more good we can do. Same thing with good works. Okay. There's the tribunal of the preceptory. It is the first instance of appeals. I just talked about that. They're elected as well, right? They're the Supreme Court of, well, not the Supreme, they're like the appeals court. Chaplains are, of course, members of the preceptory or commandery, but their specific appointment either falls to the preceptor or to the commander to choose to serve on that. They're actually supposed to play a role in the governance of the body, in the local body. So Monsignor Fritz has helped us out several times on difficult questions. If we ever get a commandery going here locally, even though we have 2 priests, because they don't, one doesn't really have the ability to help us out more than occasionally, the other one mainly just offers prayers. By the way, they sent Father Russell Smith, who I never spoken to, sent me an email about you, Will. He said he's praying for you. He offered a mass and you became a novice. So there you go. Just so you know. But we could, of course, bring in priests too and ask them to be our chaplains. And then they would work with the preceptor and the council to have a program for the spiritual formation of the knights. The Grand Master has to approve all chaplains, though. but I have to send. So commander would have to send a letter of recommendation to the preceptor. The preceptor would send a recommendation letter to the Grand Master, and then they would appoint the chaplain. Chaplains, by the way, are allowed to wear the mozetta, so it looks like what the canons wear, except it's white with our red cross on it, and it's a little button-up thing. This is a cowl. Dames. So the dames, if there's multiple dames, every 3 years, they're supposed to be presided over by the magistral legate. They're supposed to elect their own delegate to the council of the preceptory. Same thing with the council of the commandery. So if we ever had multiple dames in a commandery, they'd be allowed to pick one to sit on the group, and they're allowed to speak, but they don't vote. I changed this one. The only slides I changed because the other cities didn't make sense. In theory, we ever had the joyous situation of having multiple commanderies right next to each other, we would form a priory, and there'd be an appointed superior. So if we had, for example, 5 knights in Charlestown, 5 in Richmond, and 5 in Washington, D.C., you would appoint a prior to be the general governor of that if the preceptor was dealing with 5 other commanderies spread out too. This has never happened, and I don't think it ever will, and probably anytime soon, but there it is. Like, he would have the right to sit on the preceptory council too, but it doesn't currently. It's not a thing. And then he's supposed to promote and coordinate. So obviously, if the Knights, for example, were supposed to be, say the Washington, D.C. Knights were going to be at the March for Life, it would make sense that the prior would be the prior's job, not the commander's job, to let the Baltimore and the Charlestown ones know that was going to be happening and they're invited to come. Making sure everybody gets to someplace at the same time is a surprisingly time-consuming endeavor, as I will tell you. Okay, commanderies. So commanderies, by the way, are made up of at least 3 knights, and they're supposed to have a chaplain, but they can get by with just 3 knights. Okay, they have to be at least simply professed, and then they can have a person appointed over them as their practical superior. The policy was going to be to allow them to vote on who they wanted their superior to be, but it was never put into law by me because of practical considerations. But he's the general superior. The council of okay, we'll go into what the council, there's this chapter. It's organized the exact same way again, okay? Commanders and authority, there's the council of the commandery. Those are the knights that advise. Now, if there was 15 knights here, there would only be like a few knights that were actually dealing with the day-to-day governance issues. They'd be the council, along with the commander. And then there's the chapter, all of them, which is made up of a chaplain and all the knights. Chapter commandery, they have to vote. So the chapter, remember that the chapter is made of all the knights. They have to vote to allow a novice to go to simple profession or solemn professions, or if there's a dame, for her to make her donation. So that's done by vote. And by the way, the knights get to vote on the dames, not the dames. The specific formation of the novices and so forth is done by the chaplain through that. So here's where the rubber really hits the road. We discipline our members. We discipline our members. It makes us special. It makes us special. We hold each other to account. By the way, like, you can see people when this doesn't happen, it really drives the devoted crazy, as it should. Like the Knights of Columbus, like, they get very upset over the fact that anybody can just walk in the Knights of Columbus. No standards held to account. If we ever had a member that went to a San Francisco marriage, or we had a knight who divorced his wife, or we had one who stopped going to the office or started blaspheming all the time, or just whatever moral defect, he would be brought to be disciplined and even expelled by the chapter. Now, with that being said, the preceptor could still expel a member of the commandery if it falls into preceptory business. The tithe is a concrete example. Flagrant disobedience to the preceptor would be another example, because while the preceptor has to go through the commander, right, the Grand Master can send me a letter directly telling me to do something, right? He could tell any knight to do that. Okay, so and I did ask this specifically at a council in Italy, like, can the preceptor still punish? And the answer is yes. They can also propose an award. I know we do this. I know it seems contrary to spirituality, but it's there. So there you go. So if we had some soul who, as a layman, was deeply committed to the militia, but did not join us. For example, I'll give you an example. Let's say some future point, we're sued and a lawyer represented us for free, a Catholic, a devout man. He might get a token of our friendship like that. That'd be an example. Or let's say a canon lawyer helped us out on a particular problem. The chapter of faults has to be held regularly in public when there's a commandery. Period. It has to be held. This is for self-accusation and occasionally when knights confront other knights. You don't have to bring a sin out in public. It's not like this is sharing hour. It's like you're not aware that you've broken anything against the rule. Or it's something that I wouldn't know. Like, you don't have to say the chapter of faults. I didn't say sext one day. Like, I wouldn't know that. But if you didn't show up to lauds, and you always show up to lauds, and you just didn't show up to lauds, and it was through fault, not through sickness or just some weird situation, that'd be the time to bring it up at the chapter of faults. And like, it's taken care of. Like, we're going to start like tallying up the points. Like, okay, well, after 3 times, you're out. That's the point of self-accusation, is to make an acknowledgement that you understand the thing is wrong and that you're going to correct it. Commandery Council, 3 advisors, representative of the Dame, chaplain. They plan and develop the activities of commandery. So, for example, we meet at my house every 2 weeks. If we were a commandery, this would be something we'd all vote on. Now that you just like coming to my house, we could reorganize a schedule. It's done formally. And then we hold each other to it. But I think that, like, the funny thing about it is we're so small that these things aren't really a thing. We should all be somewhat kind and accommodating to each other. I mean, that's how the Italians do it too. I mean, this is not like feet to the fire stuff. Okay. So we do not bring all the members of the commandery together to vote on an admission of a novice. It's just that little board meets and they vote on it. Okay. Obviously, if some knights have passionate ideas about somebody not being admitted, they should be obeyed. Just like, I mean, at that point, you've been dealing with somebody for 6 years. If they come to you and say, we don't think this guy should be admitted, I mean, if they've been dealing with you for 6 years, they're professed, that should be taken into consideration. They propose admission of oblates. So when a commandery is erected, they can directly propose the commander admission of an oblate. Not me. I don't have to do it. The preceptor. I do it for everybody outside. Commanderies can directly do it. They can sponsor groups. So in theory, we could like adopt the FNE as our group. Like, we could adopt a soup kitchen thing. Not that we would, but I'm just throwing it out as an example. They can exempt members from of a tithe partially. Although right now, it's funny. I don't. Right now, I asked about that, and they told me that the preceptor still does it. So maybe there's a little discrepancy here. Normally you ask the preceptor for the dispensation, but we don't really have a normal governing body for commandery. So if you can't pay the full 3% tithe, you would ask for dispensation through that. Okay. Okay, we've gone over all that. Same thing, delegate of the dames. Okay, that's the last slide there. A few more points that I want to mention here. In addition to a few things, just so you know about what a preceptor actually does. The first year I wrote far more letters because I was dealing with a ton of people who were on our rolls as novices who had never done anything in their formation. And after the first year, a priest talked to me. He's like, the church is run on letters. So I started numbering my official letters, acts. In the last 2 years, above that first year, I wrote 46 official letters to bind people under obedience, to punish people, to demand action, to ask for permission from the Grand Master, to admit members as official acts. I number my letters at this point because that way I can remember what it was. The Catholic Church is run on letters. The preceptor is not an exciting job. You write letters. You call people back. You deal with people who ask you advice. You deal with people who have misunderstandings about things. It's not some glorious, like, quasi-papal thing or anything like that. And you very much are the servant to the needs of the brothers, whatever those are, or whatever member that is. And there's too much to do with a full-time job. I'm just being direct. I pretty much have to pick and choose what I can do. And the goal is, of course, to get people on a road where they just do things without me asking. Because if I have to tell people to do it, then it'll get dropped eventually. And so a real question of, like, what are you going to put your priorities on at any given moment? So the Grand Master may be doing this full time, but I don't. Would it be more ideal to have somebody do it full time? Well, unfortunately, the reality is that even our retired knights suffer from health problems and so forth. So, it's really a question of how much can you govern? And then really, how effective is that government even if you're doing it? We have the right to own property. We are apolitical because we're nonprofits, and under our church constitutions, we don't ever publicly endorse a political party. We do explicitly say in our constitutions that we promote the social kingship of Christ. Obviously, that's a very political statement because that means that we believe there are real, tangible consequences to your membership in the mystical body, and that we want to see Christ's law rule over mankind. But we don't explicitly contribute to political things in a sense. Okay. If you have questions on that, feel free to ask. If you are ever disciplined, you have to be notified of your right to an appeal. No one's surprised by these things. Everybody's given second chances who want it, as long as they're brought into obedience, and as long as it's not through an act of madness. For example, you're just out if you leave the Catholic faith. You're out if, and I don't even need to ask the permission of the council. I can do that by myself, and I have. If you become a sedevacantist and you spout off about it to me, or even worse, if you're a novice master and then you spout off to all the novices about it and try to bring them into that, I have to discipline you. You're not going to be just kicked out on the spot. You'll be given the chance to change your opinion. But obviously, where we have a canonical standing, we recognize certain authorities within the church, and we don't, if you start going, all the popes back to Paul VI were Freemasons or whatever, and they're not valid popes, or I don't accept these councils or these moral teachings or something, I will, and I have acted in my capacity to expel those members. It's not a pleasant experience. Also, you have the burden. You have to travel to Italy every year, or whenever they call you there. Um, and wait, there was something else about the governance. Um, oh, right. The final thing is this. It is very important. It is extremely important that we only admit people into this order, at least at the start, who are good and holy and share our opinions and observance. If we don't, you can see how voting will make things very difficult. You would think, and people have thought this, that as knights, this order would be more like a monarchy. But most people don't know anything about the history of monarchies. It wasn't until King Louis of France, the 14th, the Sun King, really that absolute monarchy even emerged as a political form of government. The monarchs before that ruled with the consent of the church and the nobles. A concrete example of that, St. Edmund, the king and martyr, not Edmund the confessor, but the martyr, was a son of a nobleman who was chosen amongst the sons of the nobleman by the king to be his successors. He was voted on by a council of Saxon nobles and then approved by the bishops of England, voted on as well. And then he became monarch. He became named as a successor. Notice that was done by vote. Okay? So there's a lot of voting here. Why is voting so important? Because we need the membership to agree on things. Otherwise, there'll be constant problems. We voted to allow the members to be reimbursed of their travel expenses when they fly to these things. Why? I wanted to enshrine in our law that it wasn't going to be the preceptors or commanders' willy-nilly decision to reimburse some knights and not reimburse others. A situation happened that I became aware of where reimbursement was offered to one knight, but it wasn't offered to anybody else. It wasn't because the preceptor had it, was because of there was a misunderstanding about the authority of the chamberlain, which he didn't have any. And that's a concrete example. So we want to vote on things. We want to come to an agreement. We want to have consensus. Simple majority, ideally unanimous. By the way, at the last vote in Italy, every preceptory voted to eliminate distance candidates, except ours, because at our last chapter, this question was brought up. Every knight and our chaplain wanted to keep distance candidates. I didn't speak. I was more open to the idea of suppressing them. No offense to you, Peter, or anybody else out there. I was open to it. I didn't, because, as the novice master too, like I see the problems that emerge from it. And I could tell Dom Jason Burden by the novices, maybe he was maybe a little open to the possibility of it. But every knight voted that way, I went and advocated not that opinion. So we had a unanimous vote. It'd be suspended for every preceptory except the North American preceptory. We would maintain that right. That was put into our law. That was the decree. Okay, so there's a Congress. So we want there to be consensus if we can achieve it. Occasionally people are going to disagree, and that's fine. But as our rule says, that once a decision's been made, it's been made, everybody follows it. Everybody follows it. Okay? If you can't, ask to be dispensed. Concrete example, if we vote to do something at a certain date, and everybody's supposed to be there and you can't make it, ask for a dispensation. Not complicated, okay? Ask for a dispensation. If it's an admission of a person and you don't think he should be in, but everybody votes that he should be, once again, you got to live with it. If you can't, then this isn't the right group for you. Same thing with look around you right now. I'm preceptor right now. I'm looking at you, Will and Chris. One day, You may be my superior. You may be a commander. I may be a lowly knight. You may be the preceptor one day. I'll have to obey you. I'm prepared for that. I think. No, I think I am. That's the glory of having already been under obedience myself. All right? But look at each other and know that one day one of you might be telling the other to do something. Okay? Now, if you are on the pagans, right, as Christ said, lord it over one another. But it will not be that way with you. Let he who would be the first among you be of service. And that's how we should view it. That's why I like calling our thing our brotherhood. We're like brothers. It certainly does something from the order when we know that next year or next 3 years, somebody else could be in charge of you. It's a different kind of leadership. We're all in this together. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and go over here to the, I hope I didn't. Okay, here we go. Let me go over to the YouTube channel real quick and let's look at questions. Let me stop screen sharing real quick. And okay, I'm not up on there. If you're chatting in like crazy, just bear with me for one moment. You'll have to excuse me. I made a real boneheaded move and exited out. And okay, here we go. Yes, actually, Peter, that is exactly right. The magistral legate is like a papal nuncio, yes. And our current magistral legate is Dom Edgardo Cruz, our Puerto Rican knight. Brothers, well, that was the only question so far. Do you have any questions on the governance? Was that a pretty complete overview, brother?
Do the titles or ranks within the organization, does that carry across the whole church? Like, does they?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it does. So approach your title like this. Oh, the one thing is that you never sign your title or your membership rank. You right now you can actually sign your names. Well, you can. You're not technically voted, but you can put CPMO after your name. Okay, so once you're a novice, you can't put CPMO on any communication within the order explicitly for the church or for something we do. You would not do it like if you wrote a letter to your senator. Unless you could ask for permission to send on behalf of the knights, and then you could, you could even sign it then. What we don't want to see happen is a priest, a brother, write a letter to a bishop, chewing him out and sign it, Dom such and such, CPMO, and feel like we've started like a war, and that has happened. And that's why you don't do that. And in fact, the standing rule right now is if you have to, that you never write a letter to a bishop as a knight without the permission of the preceptor and the magistral legate. Okay, so you never write, you can write letters all day to the bishop as long as you don't sign it, Dom such and such, CPMO, or I'm writing you on behalf of the poor knights of Christ. Don't do that. If you have a personal concern about your diocese, you want to write as a private civilian, and you send that off, that's fine. Oh, just a second, my battery's about to die. Hold on. And since there's no commander in this area, yes, you would. Well, right now you fall under obedience as soon as you're admitted as a novice to the preceptor, and specifically to your novice master. He would be, if you needed something cleared in obedience, and I will be right back because my laptop is about to die.